effective antidepressant from a bacterial mold first uncovered over 200 years ago. But there is more to the drug than anyone could have imagined. When Edward turns violent and the corpses of mutilated animals appear near the laboratory, his girlfriend decides to investigate the truth about this new miracle drug before it claims any more innocent lives. From the doctor, whose best selling thrillers have created fear and excitement for over a decade, comes a very harrowing tale of ambition, abandoned ethics, and also uncontrollable greed. So, here is a prelude for you. It's dated Saturday, February 6th, 1692. So, it's based in this year, 1692. Spurred on by the penetrating cold, Mercy Griggs snapped her riding crop above the back of her mare. The horse picked up the pace, drawing the sleigh effortlessly over the hard packed snow. Mercy snuggled deeper into the high collar of her sealskin coat and clasped her hands together within her muff in a vain attempt to shield herself from the Arctic air. It was a windless, clear day of pallid sunshine. Seasonally banished to its southern trajectory, the sun had to struggle to illuminate the snowy landscape, which was locked in the grip of a cruel New England winter. Even at midday, long violet shadows extended northward from the trunks of the leafless trees. Congealed masses of smoke hung motionlessly above the chimneys of the widely dispersed farmhouses as if frozen against the ice blue polar sky. Mercy had been traveling for almost half an hour. She had come southwest along the Ipswich Road, which was from her home at the base of the Leeches Hill on the royal side. She had crossed bridges spanning the Frostfish River, the Crane River, and the Cowhouse River, and now entered into the Northfield section of Salem town. From that point, it was only a mile and a half to the town center. But Mercy wasn't going to town. As she passed the Jacobs farmhouse, she could see her destination. It was a home of Ronald Stewart. He was a very successful merchant and a ship owner. What had drawn Mercy away from her own warm hearth on such a frigid day was neighborly concern. It was mixed with a dose of curiosity. At the moment, the steward's household was the source of the most interesting gossip. Pulling her maid to a stop in front of the house, Mercy eyed the structure. It certainly bespoke of Mr. Stewart's acumen as a merchant. It was an imposing, multi-gabled building, sheathed in brown clapboard and roofed with the highest grade slate. Its many windows were glazed with imported diamond-shaped panes of glass. Most impressive of all was the elaborately turned pendants suspended from the corners of the second floor overhang. All in all, the house appeared more suited to the center of the town than to the countryside. Confident that the sound of the sleigh bells on her horse's harness had announced her arrival, Mercy waited. To the right of the front door was another horse and sleigh, suggesting that company had already arrived. The horse was under a blanket. From its nostrils issued intermittent billows of vapor that vanished instantly into the bone dry air. Mercy didn't have long to wait. Almost immediately, the door opened, and within the door frame stood a 27-year-old, raven haired, green eyed woman whom Mercy knew to be Elizabeth Stewart. In her arms, she comfortably cradled a musket. From around her sides issued a multitude of children's curious faces. Unexpected social visits in isolated homes were not common in such frigid weather. Mercy Griggs, called the visitor, wife of Dr. William Griggs, I have come to bid you good day. It is a pleasure indeed, called Elizabeth in return. Come in for some hot cider to chase the chill from your bones. Elizabeth leaned the musket against the inside door frame and directed her oldest boy, Jonathan, aged 9, to go out to cover and tether Mrs. Griggs' horse. With great pleasure, Mercy entered the house and, following Elizabeth's direction, turned right into the common room. As she passed the musket, she eyed it. Elizabeth, catching her line of sight, explained, "It is from growing up in the wilderness of Andover. We have to be on the lookout for Red Indians all hours of the day." "I see," Mercy said, although a woman wielding a musket was apart from her normal experience. Mercy hesitated for a moment on the threshold of the kitchen and surveyed the domestic scene. It appeared to be more like a schoolhouse than a home. There were more than half a dozen children. On the hearth was a large crackling fire that radiated a welcome warmth. Enveloping the room was a mixture of savory aromas. Some of them were coming from a kettle of pork stew, which was simmering on its lug pole over the fire. Others were rising from a large bowl of cooling corn pudding, but most of them were coming from the beehive oven that was built into the back of the fireplace. Inside, multiple loaves of bread were turning a dark golden brown. "I hope in God's name I am not a bother," Mercy said. "Heavens, no," Elizabeth replied as she took Mercy's coat and directed her to a ladder back chair near to the fire. "You're a welcome reprieve from the likes of these unruly children. But you have got me baking, and I must remove my bread." Quickly she lifted a long-handled peel and with short deft thrusts picked up the 8 loaves one by one and deposited them to cool on the long trestle table that dominated the center of the room. Mercy watched Elizabeth as she worked, remarking to herself that she was a fine-looking woman with a high cheekbones, porcelain complexion, and lithesome figure. It was also apparent that she was accomplished in the kitchen by the way she handled the bread making and with the skill she winced while stoking the fire and adjusting the trammel holding the kettle. At the same time, Mercy sensed there was something very disturbing about Elizabeth's persona. There wasn't the requisite Christian meekness or humbleness. In fact, Elizabeth seemed to project an alacrity and a boldness that was unbecoming of a Puritan woman whose husband was away in Europe. Mercy began to sense that there was more to the gossip that she had heard than idle hearsay. "The aroma of your bread has an unfamiliar piquancy," Mercy said as she leaned over the cooling loaves of bread. "It is rye bread," Elizabeth explained as she began to slip 8 more loaves into the oven. "Rye bread?" Mercy questioned. "Only the poorest farmers with marshy land ate rye bread." "I grew up on rye bread," Elizabeth explained. "I do indeed like its spicy taste. But you may wonder why I am baking so many loaves. The reason is that I have in mind to encourage the whole of the village to utilize rye to conserve the wheat supplies. As you know, the cool wet weather through spring and summer and now this terrible winter has hurt the crop." "It is a noble thought," Mercy said, "but perhaps it is an issue for the men to discuss at the town meeting." Elizabeth then shocked Mercy with a hearty laugh. When Elizabeth noticed Mercy's expression, she explained herself. "The men don't think in such practical terms. They are more concerned with the pol- polio epidemic between the village and the town. Besides, there is more than a poor harvest. We women must think of the refugees from the Indian raids because it is already the 4th year of King William's War and there is no end in sight." "A woman's role is in the home," Mercy began, but she trailed off, taken aback by Elizabeth's pertness. "I have also been encouraging people to take the refugees into their homes," Elizabeth said as she dusted the flour from her hand onto her smocked apron. "We have taken in 2 children after the raid on Casco, Maine, which was in Italy a year ago last May." Elizabeth called out sharply to the children and interrupted their play by insisting that they come to meet the doctor's wife. Elizabeth first introduced Mercy to Rebecca Sheaf, age 12, and Mary Ruths, age 9. Both had been cruelly orphaned during the Casco raid, but now they appeared hale and happy. Next, Elizabeth introduced Joanna, age 13, Ronald's daughter from a previous marriage. Then came her own children, Sarah, age 10, Jonathan, age 9, and Daniel, age 3. Finally, Elizabeth introduced Anne Putnam, who is age 12, Abigail Williams, age 11, and Betty Paris, age 9, who is also visiting from Salem village. After the children dutifully acknowledged Mercy, they were allowed to return to their play, which Mercy noticed involved several glasses of water and fresh eggs. I'm surprised to see the children here, Mercy said. I've asked my children, to invite them, Elizabeth said. They are friends who are attending the Royal Side School. I felt it is best that my children not school in Salem town with all the riffraff and the ruffians. I understand, Mercy said. I will be sending the children home with loaves of rye bread, Elizabeth said. She smiled friskily. It will be more effective than giving their families a mere suggestion. Mercy nodded but didn't comment. My Elizabeth was mildly overwhelming. Would you care for a loaf? Elizabeth asked. Oh, no, thank you, Mercy said. My husband, the doctor, would never eat rye bread. It is much too coarse. As Elizabeth turned her attention back to her second batch of bread, Mercy's eyes roamed the kitchen. She noticed a fresh wheel of cheese having come directly from the cheese press. She saw a pitcher of cider on the corner of the hearth. Then she noticed something more striking. Arrayed across the window sill was a row of dolls made from painted wood and carefully sewn fabric. Each was dressed in the costume of a particular livelihood. There was a merchant, a blacksmith, a goodwife, a cartwright, and even a doctor. The doctor was dressed in black with a starched lace collar. Mercy stood up and walked to the window. He picked up the doll dressed as a doctor. A large needle was thrust into its chest. What are these figures? Mercy asked, with barely concealed concern. These are dolls that I make for the orphan children, Elizabeth said, without looking up from her labor with her bread. She was removing each loaf of bread, buttering its top, then replacing it in the oven. My deceased mother, God bless her soul, taught me how to make them. Why does this particular doll have a needle rending its heart? Mercy asked. The costume is unfinished, Elizabeth said. I am forever misplacing the needle, and they are so dear. Mercy replaced the doll and unconsciously wiped her hands. Anything that suggested magic and the occult made her uncomfortable. It was a kind of voodoo, she guessed. Leaving the dolls, she turned to the children and after watching them for a moment, asked Elizabeth what they were doing. It is a trick that my mother taught me, Elizabeth said. She slipped the last loaf of bread back into the oven. It is a way of divining the future by interpreting the shape of the egg white dropped into water. Bid them to stop immediately, Mercy said with alarm. Elizabeth looked up from her work and eyed her visitor. But why? She asked. It is white magic, Mercy admonished. It is harmless fun, Elizabeth said. It is merely something for the children to do when they are confined by such a winter. My sister and I did it many times to try to learn the trade of our future husbands. Elizabeth laughed. Of course, it never told me that I would marry a ship owner and move to Salem. I thought I was to be a poor farmer's wife. White magic breeds black magic, Mercy said, and black magic is abhorrent to God. It is the devil's work. It never hurt my sister or myself, Elizabeth said, nor my mother for that matter. Your mother is no more, Mercy said sternly. Yes, but it is sorcery, Mercy continued. Blood rose to her cheeks. No sorcery is harmless. And remember the bad times we are experiencing with the war and then the smallpox in Boston only last year? Just last Sabbath, Reverend Paris' sermon told us that these horrid problems are occurring because people have not been keeping the covenant with God by allowing laxity in religious observance. I hardly think this childish game disturbs the covenant, Elizabeth said, and we have not been lax in our religious obligations. But indulging in magic most certainly is, Mercy said, just like tolerance of the Quakers. Elizabeth waved her hand in dismissal. Such problems are beyond my purview. I surely don't see anything wrong with the Quakers since they are a peaceful, hard-working people. You must not voice such opinions, Mercy chided. Reverend Increase Mather has said that the Quakers are under a strong delusion of the devil. Perhaps you should read Reverend Cotton Mather's book, Memorable Providences. This relates to witchcraft and possessions. I can loan it to you since my husband purchased it in Boston. Reverend Mather says the bad times we're experiencing stems from the devil's wish to return our New England Israel to his children, the red men. Directing her attention to the children, Elizabeth called out to them to quiet down. Their shrieking had reached a crescendo. Still, she quieted them more to interrupt Mercy's sermonizing than to subdue their excited talk. Looking back at Mercy, Elizabeth said, "She'll be most thankful for the opportunity to read the book." Speaking of church matters, Mercy said, "Has your husband considered joining the church? Since he's a landowner over here, he'll be welcome." "I don't know," Elizabeth said. "We have never spoken of it." "We need support," Mercy said. "The Porter family and their friends are refusing to pay their share of the Reverend Paris's expenses." "When will your husband return?" "In the spring," Elizabeth said. "Why did he go to Europe?" Mercy asked. "He's having a new class of ship built," Elizabeth said. "It is called a frigate. He says it will be fast and able to defend itself against the French privateers and the Caribbean pirates." After touching the tops of the cooling loaves with the palms of her hand, Elizabeth called out to the children to tell them it was time to eat. As they drifted over to the table, she asked them if they wanted some of the fresh, warm bread. Although her, although her own children turned up their noses, although her own, although her own children turned up their noses at the offer, Anne Putnam, Abigail Williams, and Betty Paris were eager. Elizabeth opened a trap door in the corner of the kitchen and sent Sarah down to fetch some butter from the dairy storage. Mercy was intrigued by the trap door. "It was Ronald's idea," Elizabeth explained. It functions like a ship's hatch and affords access to the cellar without having to go outside. Once the children were set with plates of pork stew and thick slices of bread, if they wanted it, Elizabeth poured herself and Mercy mugs of hot cider. To escape the children's chatter, they carried the cider into the parlor. "My word," Mercy exclaimed. Her eyes had immediately gone to a sizable portrait of Elizabeth hanging over the mantel. Its shocking realism awed her, especially the radiant green eyes. For a moment, she stood rooted in the center of the room while Elizabeth deftly kindled the fire that had reduced itself to glowing coals. "Your dress is so revealing," Mercy said, "and your head is unadorned." "The painting disturbed me at first," Elizabeth admitted. She stood up from the hearth and positioned two chairs in front of the now blazing fire. "It was Ronald's idea. It pleases him. Now, I hardly notice it. It is so posh. It is so poppish," Mercy said with a sneer. She angled her chair to exclude the painting from her line of sight. She took a sip from the warm cider and tried to organize her thoughts. The visit had not gone as she had imagined. Elizabeth's character was disconcerting. Mercy had yet to even broach the subject of why she had come. She cleared her throat. "I've heard a rumor," Mercy began. "I'm certain there can be no verity to it. I've heard that you have the fancy to buy the Northfields property." "It is no rumor," Elizabeth said brightly. "It will be done. We shall own land on both sides of the Wollaston River. The tract even extends into Salem village, where it abuts Ronald's lots. But the Putnams have the intention to buy the land," Mercy said indignantly. "It is important for them. They need access to the water for their endeavors, particularly their ironworks. Their only problem is the proper funds, for which they must wait for the next harvest. They should be very angry if you persevere, and they will try to stop the sale." Elizabeth shrugged. "I have the money now," she said. "I want the land because we intend to build a new house to enable us to take in more orphans from the war." Elizabeth's face brightened with excitement and her eyes sparkled. "Daniel Andrew has agreed to design and build the house. Andrew said that it will be a grand house of brick like those of London town." Mercy could not believe what she was hearing. Elizabeth's pride and covetousness knew no bounds. Mercy swallowed another mouthful of cider with difficulty. "Do you know that Andrew Daniel is married to Sarah Porter?" she asked. "Indeed," Elizabeth said. "Before Ronald left, we entertained them both." "How, may I ask, do you have access to such vast sums of money?" "Well, with the demands of the war, Ronald's firm had been doing exceptionally well, profiting from the misfortune of others," Mercy stated sententiously. "Ronald prefers to say that he is providing sorely needed material." Mercy stared for a moment into Elizabeth's bright green eyes. She was doubly appalled that Elizabeth seemed to have no conception of her transgression. In fact, Elizabeth was smiling now, and she returned Mercy's gaze, sipping her cider contentedly. "I've heard the rumor," Mercy said finally. "I couldn't believe it. Such business is so unnatural with your husband away. It is not in God's plan. I must warn you, people will start talking. They are saying you are overstepping your station as a farmer's daughter." "I shall always be my father's daughter," Elizabeth said. "But now I am also a merchant's wife." Before Mercy could respond, a tremendous crash and a multitude of screams burst forth from the kitchen. The sudden noise brought both Mercy and Elizabeth to their feet in terror. With Mercy directly behind her, Elizabeth rushed from the parlor into the kitchen, snapping up the musket en route. The trestle table had been tipped onto its side. Wooden bowls empty of their stew were strewn across the floor. Anne Putnam was lurching fitfully about the room as she tore at her clothes and collided with the furniture while screaming that she was being bitten. The other children had shrunk back against the wall in shocked horror. Dispensing with the musket, Elizabeth rushed to Anne and grasped her shoulders. "What is it, girl?" Elizabeth demanded. "What is biting you?" For a moment, Anne remained still. Her eyes had assumed a glazed, faraway appearance. "Anne!" Elizabeth called. "What is wrong with you?" Anne's mouth opened and her tongue slowly protruded to its very limit, while her body began chorea-like movements. Elizabeth tried to restrain her, but Anne fought with surprising strength. Then Anne clutched at her throat. "I can't breathe," Anne gasped. "Help me, I'm being choked." "Let's get her upstairs," Elizabeth shouted at Mercy. Together they half carried and half dragged the breathing girl up to the second floor. No sooner had they got her onto the bed than she began to convulse. She's having a horrid fit," I think it's best that I fetch my husband, the doctor. Yes, Elizabeth said, hurry, hurry. Mercy shook her head in dismay as she descended the stairs. Having recovered from her initial shock, the calamity didn't surprise her, and she knew its cause. It was the sorcery. Elizabeth had invited the devil into her house. Next, we move on to another date, Tuesday, July 12th, 1692. Ronald Stewart opened the cabin door and stepped out onto the deck and into the cool morning air, dressed in his best knee breeches, his scarlet waistcoat with starched ruffles, and even his powdered peruke. He was beside himself with excitement. They had just rounded Norgus Point of Marblehead and had set a course directly for Salem town. Already over the bow, he could see Turner's Wharf. Let us not furl the sails until the last moment, Ronald called to Captain Allen, standing behind the helm. I want the town folk to see the speed of this ship. Yes, yes, Captain Allen shouted back. Ronald leaned his sizable and muscled frame on the gunwale as the sea breeze caressed his tanned broad face and tousled his sandy blonde hair from beneath his wig. Happily he gazed at the familiar landmarks. It was good to be coming home, although it was not without a degree of anxiety. He had been gone for almost 6 months, 2 months longer than anticipated, and he had not received a single letter. Sweden had seemed to be the end of the earth. He wondered if Elizabeth had received any of the letters that he had sent. There had been no guarantee of their delivery, since he had not found any vessel going directly to the colony or even to London for that matter. It is time, Captain Allen shouted as he approached land. Otherwise, this whole craft will mount the pier and will not stop till Essex Street. Give the orders, Ronald shouted. The men surged aloft at the captain's command, and within minutes the vast stretches of canvas were pulled in and lashed to the spars. The ship slowed. At a point 100 yards from the wharf, Ronald noted a small boat being launched and quickly oared in their direction. As it approached, Ronald recognized his clerk, Chester Proctor, standing in the bow. Ronald waved merrily, but Chester did not return the gesture. Greetings, Ronald shouted when the boat was within earshot. Chester remained silent. As the small boat drew alongside, Ronald could see his clerk's thin face was drawn and his mouth set. Ronald's excitement was tempered by concern. Something was wrong. I think it's best you come ashore immediately, Chester called out to Ronald once the skiff was made secure against the larger craft. A ladder was extended into the small boat, and after a quick consultation with the captain, Ronald climbed down. Once he was sitting in the stern, they shoved off, and Chester sat next to him. The two seamen amidships leant their backs to their oars. What is wrong? Ronald asked, afraid to hear the answer. His worst fear was an Red Indian raid on his home. When he had left, he knew they'd be as close as Andover. There have been terrible happenings in Salem, Chester said. He was overwrought and plainly nervous. Providence has brought you home barely in time. We have been through much disquieted and distress that you would arrive too late. It is my children? Ronald asked with alarm. No, it is not your children, Chester said. They are safe and hale. It is your good wife Elizabeth. She has been in prison for many months. On what charge? Ronald demanded. Witchcraft, Chester said. I beg your pardon for being the bearer of such ill tidings. She has been convicted by a special court, and there is a warrant for her execution the next Tuesday. That is absurd, Ronald growled. My wife is no witch. That I know, Chester said, but there has been a witchcraft frenzy in the town since February, and with almost 100 people accused, there has already been one execution. Bridget Bishop on June 10th. I knew her, Ronald admitted. She was a woman of a fiery temperament. She ran the unlicensed tavern out on Ipswich Road, but of which it seems most improbable. What has happened to cause such fear of malefic will? It is because of the fits, Chester said. Certain women, mostly young women, have been afflicted in a most pitiful way. A spirit has entered into all of them. Have you witnessed these fits? Ronald asked. Oh, yes, Chester said. The whole town has seen them at the hearings in front of the magistrates. They are terrible to behold. The afflicted scream of torment, and they are not in the right minds. They go alternatively blind, deaf, and dumb, and sometimes all at once. They shake worse than the Quakers and shriek before they are being bitten by invisible beings. Their tongues come out and then are as if swallowed. But the worst is that their joints do bend as if to break. Ronald's mind was a whirlwind of thought. This was a most unexpected turn of events. Sweat broke forth on his forehead as the morning sun beat down upon him. Angrily, he tore his wig from his head and threw it to the floor of the boat. He tried to think what he should do. I have a horse carriage waiting out, Chester said, breaking the heavy silence as they neared the pier. I think you'd care to go directly to prison? Yes, yes, Ronald said tersely. They disembarked and walked quickly to the street. They climbed aboard the vehicle and Chester picked up the horse reins. With a snap, the horse started. The wagon bumbled along the cobblestone quay. Neither man spoke. How was it decided that these fits were caused by witchcraft? Ronald asked when they reached Essex Street. It was Dr. Griggs who said so, Chester said. Then Reverend Paris from the village, then everyone, even the magistrates. What made them so confident? Ronald asked. It was apparent at the hearings, Chester said. All the people could see how the accused tormented the afflicted and how the afflicted were instantly relieved from their suffering when touched by the accused. So they didn't touch them to torment them. It was the spectres of the accused who did the mischief, Chester explained, and the spectres could only be seen by the afflicted. It was thus that the accused were called upon by the afflicted. And my wife was called out upon in this fashion? Ronald asked. It is so, Chester said, by Anne Putnam, daughter of Thomas Putnam of Salem village. I know Thomas Putnam, Ronald said, a small angry man. Anne Putnam was the first to be afflicted, Chester said hesitantly, in your house. Her first fit was in your common room in the beginning of February, and to this day she is still afflicted, as is her mother and senior. What about my children? Ronald asked. Are they afflicted as well? Your children have been spared, Chester said. Thank the Lord, Ronald said. They turned on to Prison Lane. Neither man spoke. Chester pulled to a stop in front of the jail. Ronald told him to watch and wait and alighted from the horse carriage. With brittle emotions, Ronald sought out the jailer, William Luton. Ronald found him in his untidy office eating fresh corn bread from the bakery. He was an obese man with a shock of unwashed hair and a red nodular nose. Ronald despised him, a known sadist who delighted in tormenting his charges. William was obviously not pleased to see Ronald. Leaping to his feet, he cowered behind his chair. No visitors are allowed to see the condemned, he croaked through a mouthful of bread, by order of Magistrate Hathorn. Barely in control of himself, Ronald reached out and grabbed a fistful of William's woolen shirt and drew his face within an inch of his own. If you have mistreated my wife, you will answer to me, Ronald snarled. It's not my fault, William said. It is the authorities. I must respect their orders. Take me to her, Ronald snapped. But William managed before Ronald tightened his grip and constricted his throat. William gurgled. Ronald relaxed his fist. William coughed but produced the keys. Ronald let go of him and followed him. As he unlocked a stout oak door, he said, I will report this. There is no need, Ronald said. As soon as I leave here, I will go directly to the magistrate and tell him myself. Beyond the oak door, they passed several cells. All were full. The inmates stared back at Ronald with glazed eyes. Some he recognized, but he didn't address them. The prison was enveloped with a heavy silence. Ronald had to pull out a handkerchief to cover his nose from the smell. At the top of a stone staircase, William stopped to light a shielded candle. After opening another stout oak door, they descended into the worst area of the prison. The stench was overwhelming. The basement consisted of two large rooms. The walls were damp granite. The many prisoners were all manacled to the walls or the floor with either wrist or leg irons or both. Ronald had to step over people to follow William. There was hardly room for another person. Just a moment, Ronald said. William stopped and turned around. Ronald squatted down. He had recognized somebody he knew to be a pious woman, Rebecca Nurse. Ronald questioned, "What in God's name are you doing here?" Rebecca shook her head slowly. "Only God knows," she managed to say. Ronald stood up feeling weak. It was as if the whole place had gone crazy. "Over here," William said, pointing towards a far corner of the basement. "Let us finish this." Ronald followed. His anger had been overwhelmed by pity. William stopped and Ronald looked down. In the candlelight, he could barely recognize his wife. Elizabeth was covered with filth. She was manacled in oversized chains, and she barely had the energy to scatter the vermin which freely roamed the semi darkness. Ronald took the candle from William and bent down next to his wife. Despite her condition, she smiled at him. "I'm glad you're back," she said weakly. "Now I don't have to worry about the children. Are they all right?" Ronald swallowed with difficulty. His mouth had gone dry. "I have come directly from the ship to the prison," he said. "I have yet to see the children." "Please do. They will be happy to see you. I fear they are disquieted." "I shall attend to them," Ronald promised. "But first, I must see to getting you free." "Perhaps," Elizabeth said. "Why are you so late in returning?" "The outfitting of the ship took longer than planned," Ronald said. "The newness of the design caused us much difficulty." "I sent so many letters," Elizabeth said. "But I never got any of them," Ronald replied. "Well, at least you are home now," Elizabeth said. "I shall be back," Ronald said as he stood up. He was shaking with panic and beside himself with concern. He motioned to William for them to leave and followed him back to the office. "I'm just doing my duty," William said meekly. He was unsure of Ronald's state of mind. "Show me the papers," Ronald demanded. William shrugged and, after going through the debris on the top of his desk, handed Ronald Elizabeth's Mittimus and her execution warrant. Ronald read them and handed them back. Reaching into his purse, he pulled out a few coins. "I want Elizabeth moved from here and her situation improved." William happily took the money. "I thank you, kind sir," he said. The coins disappeared into the pockets of his breeches. "But I cannot move her. Capital cases are always housed on the lower level. I also cannot remove the irons, since they are specified in the Mittimus to keep her spectre, the spirit, from leaving her body. But I can improve her condition in response to your kind consideration. Do whatever you can. You must help Elizabeth," Ronald said. Outside, it took Ronald a moment to climb into the carriage. His legs felt unsteady and weak. "To Magistrate Corwin's house. Take me there," he said. Chester urged the horse forward. He wanted to ask about Elizabeth, but he dared not. Ronald's distress was much too apparent. They rode in silence. When they reached the corner of Essex and Washington streets, Ronald climbed down from the horse carriage. "Wait," he said laconically. Ronald rapped on the front door, and when it was opened, he was relieved to see the tall, gaunt frame of his old friend Jonathan Corwin standing in the doorway. As soon as Jonathan recognized Ronald, his petulant expression changed to one of sympathetic concern. Immediately, he ushered Ronald into his parlor, where he requested his wife to let them have a private conversation. His wife had been working at her flax wheel in the corner. I really apologize, Jonathan said once they were alone. It is a sorry welcome for a weary traveler. Tell me what to do now, Ronald said weakly. I am afraid I don't know what to say, Jonathan began. It is an unruly time. There is a spirit in the town full of contention and animosities, and perhaps a strong and general delusion. I am no longer certain of my thoughts, for recently my own mother in law, Margaret, had been cried out against. She is no witch, which makes me question the veracity, the truth of this afflicted girl's allegations and their motivations. At the moment, the motives of the girls are not my concern, Ronald said. What I need to know is my beloved wife is being treated with utmost brutality. Jonathan sighed deeply. I am afraid there is little I can do right now. Your wife is already being convicted by a jury serving the special court of Oyer and Termina, who is giving the hearing on the backlog of all these cases. But you have said that you will question the accuser's veracity, Ronald said. Yes, Jonathan agreed. But your wife's conviction did not depend on the girl's testimony or the spectral demonstration in the court. Your wife's trial was shorter than the others, even shorter than Bridget Bishop's was. Your wife's guilt was apparent to all because the evidence against her was real and conclusive. There was no doubt. So you believe my wife is the criminal? Ronald asked with disbelief. I do indeed, Jonathan said. I apologize, but it is a harsh truth that you have to hear. For a moment, Ronald stared into the face of his friend while his mind tried to deal with this new and disturbing information. Ronald had always been a very valued person and he had always valued and respected Jonathan's opinion. But there must be something that can be done, Ronald said. If you need to delay the execution so that I have time to learn the facts. Jonathan reached out and placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. As a local magistrate and a judge, there is nothing I can do. Perhaps you can go home and attend to your alleged children. I shall not give up so easily, Ronald said. Elizabeth must be helped. Then all I can suggest now for you to do is to go to Boston and have a talk with Samuel Sewall. Jonathan said, I know you are friends and you are classmates from Harvard College. Perhaps he can make a suggestion with his connections with the colonial government. He will not be interested. He will not be disinterested. He is one of the justices of the Court of Oyer and Termina, and he has voiced to me some misgivings about the whole thing, as did Nathaniel Santos Stoll, who even resigned his appointment to the bench. Ronald thanked Jonathan and hurried outside. He told Chester his intentions and was soon outfitted with a saddled horse. Within an hour, he set out on the horse on the 17-mile journey. He travelled past Cambridge, crossing the Charles River at the Great Bridge, and approached Boston from the southwest side onto the highway to Roxbury. As Ronald rode the length of the Shawmut Peninsula's narrow neck, he began to get progressively anxious. His mind tortured him with the question of what he would do if Samuel was either unwilling or unable to help. Ronald had no other such ideas. Samuel was to be his last chance. Passing through the town gate with its fortifications, Ronald's eyes involuntarily wandered to the gallows from which a fresh corpse dangled. The sight was a rude reminder, and a shiver of fear passed down his spine. In response, he urged his horse to quicken its pace. The bustle of Boston, with its more than 6,000 inhabitants and more than 800 dwellings, slowed down Ronald's progress. It was almost 1 by the time Ronald arrived at Samuel's South End house. Ronald dismounted his horse and tethered it to the picket fence. He found Samuel smoking tobacco from a long stemmed pipe following his noonday meal. Ronald noted that he had become significantly portly during the last few years and was certainly a far cry from the rakish person who used to skate with Ronald on the Charles River during their college years. Samuel was happy to see Ronald, but his greeting was restrained. He anticipated the nature of Ronald's visit before even he approached the subject of Elizabeth's ordeal. In response to Ronald's questions, he confirmed Jonathan Corwin's story. He said that Elizabeth's guilt was unquestioned due to the real evidence that Sheriff Corwin had seized from Ronald's house. Ronald's shoulders slumped. He sighed and fought off tears. He was at a loss. He asked his host for a mug of beer. When Samuel returned with the brew, Ronald had recovered his composure. After a long draught, he asked Samuel the nature of the evidence that was used against his wife. I cannot say, but why? Ronald asked. He studied his friend Samuel and could see that he was not comfortable. Ronald's curiosity mounted. He hadn't thought to ask Jonathan about the evidence. Surely I have a right to know? Indeed, Samuel said, but still he hesitated. Do tell me. I trust it will help me understand this whole wretched mess. Perhaps it is best that you visit my good friend, Reverend Cotton Mather. Samuel said. He stood up. Mather has more experience in the affairs of this invisible world. He will know how to advise you. I bow to your discretion, Ronald said as he got to his feet. They took Samuel's horse carriage and went directly to the Old North Church. An inquiry with a charwoman told them that Reverend Mather was at his home on the corner of Middle Street and Prince Street. Since the destination was close, they walked. It was also convenient to leave the horse and the carriage in Charles Square in front of the church. Samuel's knock was answered by a youthful maidservant who showed them into the inside. Reverend Mather appeared post haste and greeted them. Samuel explained the nature of their visit. I see, Reverend Mather said. He motioned to chairs and they all sat down. Ronald eyed the cleric. He had met him before somewhere. He was younger than Ronald and Samuel. They had both graduated from the same college in 1678, 7 years after they had. Age notwithstanding, he was also evidencing some of the physical changes that Ronald saw in Samuel, and for the same reasons. He had put on a bit of weight, and his nose was red and slightly enlarged. The face had a doughy consistency, yet his eyes sparkled with intelligence and fiery resolve. You have my loving solicitude for your tribulations, Reverend Mather said to Ronald. God's ways are often inscrutable for us mortals. Beyond your personal torment, I am deeply troubled about the events in Salem town. The population has been overcome by an unruly and turbulent spirit. I fear the events are spinning out of control. At the moment, the concern is for my wife, Elizabeth, Ronald said. He had not come for a lecture or a sermon. As it should be, said Reverend Mather, but I think it is important for you to understand that we, the clergy and the civic authorities, must think of the whole congregation too. I had expected the devil to appear in our midst. The only consolation about this whole demonic affair is now, thanks to your wife, we know where. I need to know the evidence that was used against my wife, Elizabeth, Ronald said. I shall show it to you, said Reverend Mather, provided you keep its nature a secret, since we fear its general revelation will inflame the distress in Salem even more than it currently is. But what if I choose to appeal the conviction? Ronald demanded. Once you see the evidence, you will choose not to do so. Reverend Mather said. Trust me in this. Do I have your word? You have my word, Ronald said, provided my right to appeal is not forsaken. They stood up in unison. Reverend Mather led the way to a flight of stone steps. After he lit a taper, he began the descent into the cellar. I have discussed this evidence at length with my father, increased Mather, Reverend Mather said over his shoulder. We have agreed that it is of great importance for future generations as a material proof for the existence of this invisible world. Accordingly, we believe that its rightful place should be Harvard College. As you know, he is currently the acting president of the institution. Ronald didn't respond. At the moment, his mind was incapable of dealing with such academic issues. Both myself and my father also agree that there has to be too much reliance in Salem's witch trials, said Reverend Mather. They reached the bottom of the stairs, and while Samuel and Ronald waited, he proceeded to light the wall lights. He spoke as he moved about the cellar. We are much concerned that this reliance could well draw innocent people into the storm of it. Ronald started to protest. For a moment, he didn't have the patience to listen to such larger concerns, but Samuel restrained him by laying her hand on his shoulder. Elizabeth's evidence is the kind of real evidence that we would like to see in every case, Reverend Mather said as he waved Ronald and Samuel to follow him to a large locked cupboard. But it is also terribly inflammatory. It was at my discretion that this was removed from Salem and brought here after her trial. I have never witnessed a stronger evidence of the devil's power and the ability to do mischief. Oh, Reverend, Ronald said at last, I should like to return to Salem forthwith. If you can just show me what it is, I can be on my way. Patience, my good man, Reverend Mather said as he drew a key from his waistcoat. The nature of this evidence, I'm sure you must be prepared for it. It is quite shocking. For that reason, it is my suggestion that your wife's trial be held behind closed doors and the jury be sworn to secrecy on their honor. It is a precaution not to deny her due justice, but to prevent the public hysteria that would have played into the devil's hand. I am prepared for anything, Ronald said with a touch of exasperation. The Lord be with you, Reverend Mather said as he slipped the key into the lock. Brace yourself. Reverend Mather unlocked the cabinet. Then, with both hands, he swung open the doors and stepped back for Ronald to see. Ronald's breath escaped in a gasp, and his eyes momentarily bulged. His hand involuntarily covered his mouth in horror and dismay. He swallowed hard. He tried to speak, but his voice momentarily failed him. He cleared his throat. Enough, he managed, and averted his eyes. Reverend Mather closed the cabinet's door and locked them. It is certain that this is Elizabeth's handiwork? Ronald asked weakly. Beyond any doubt. Not only was it seized by Sheriff George Corwett from your property, but Elizabeth herself freely admitted responsibility for it. Good Lord, Ronald said. Surely it is a work of the devil. Yet I know in my heart that Elizabeth cannot be a witch. It is hard for a man to believe that his wife be inconvenient with the devil, Samuel said. But the evidence, combined with the testimony of the afflicted girls, stated that Elizabeth's spirit tormented them. This itself is compelling proof. Okay, so to be continued later.